That's another trophy for the Rebellion in the books. Max and Darth are here to explain exactly what it took.
It only matters if it ladders. Comment below as we walk through the Week 2 recap of Karlov Manor Standard. Alrighty folks, in Tier 1 World we have a spicy remix on Esper Midrange to mix with the usual offenders of Domain and Mono Red. But wait, there's more. Dimir Aggro has an entirely different look now, and Slogurk broke through at long last. As the new villain of the format, Boros Convoke took down a few tournaments as well. We've got all that and more in this action-packed Week 2 State of the Meta.
In Tier 2 land, we see our mid-range archetypes slugging it out in the form of Golgari and Rakdos Mid, with Bant Toxic maintaining a spot here, while Azorius Control finds its footing right next to it.
And lastly, in Brewer's Corner, we'll take a look at 6 different concepts ranging from combo to control to hyper aggro and beyond. Stay tuned folks, you're in for a treat this week. Now let's kick things off with our Tier 1 breakdown, starting with Boros Convoke. Alrighty gang, we're leading off with Boros Convoke because I was able to take down the Pizza Box Open this past Sunday in a 113 player tournament using exactly this list. Now, to clarify a few things, I played against various flavors of Control 4 times, Bant Toxic 3 times, the Mirror twice, and 1 Golgari Roots player for a total record of 9-1. And I know people will question various card selections in this list, so let's go over the basics quickly. We do want a 3-3 split on Case and War Leader's Call. Each has circumstances where they shine or look lackluster, but the point is that we want 10 payoff cards to bump your smaller Dirtles, and we don't have Venerated Loxodon in Standard. Therefore, we kind of need these 6 plus the 4 Immodane's Recruiter. Now, the mana base is solid. People can hate on Thrine Portal, but the fact remains that if you want to use Frank Karsten's mathematical mana base, this is where you'll end up to ensure 90% of both colors on turn 1. The flex slots are 2 Charming Scoundrel and 2 Regal Bunnicorn, and I can't really state whether either is correct, but both are typically the first card sideboarded out for upgrades, and that said, they both perform solidly for me in Game 1s against a variety of archetypes, which is it's really what you want from your flex slots if you aren't trying to hedge super hard in the main board.
Absolutely, and I have to say, I watched the final match. I saw you apply Urbrass Forge to greatly pressure your opponent. And so please tell the viewers why this card earned its slot and how it works for this archetype.
So Urbrask's Forge is there because it gets around Lockdown, it gets around Path of Peril, it gets around Glistening Deluge. These are all the hate cards they're going to bring in against you, so it diversifies your threat base and it forces them to answer a ticking time bomb of a threat while simultaneously having to answer the first wave. So in like an ideal scenario, you're going to play, you're going to curve out Creature, Knight, Errant of Eos, or Urbrask's Forge. But the beauty of that in either scenario is you're getting above the Lockdown, you're getting above Path, you're getting above Glistening Deluge. So now you have 8 ways on turn 3, hypothetically, to push above those Wrath effects and force them to sweep low and sweep high. That's something very few Control decks can do with any kind of reliability, and that's how I was able to go undefeated against Control playing this.
Just what Boros Convoke needed. Now talk to us about Mono Red Aggro.
Alrighty, so Stevie Bennett took down a 25-player RCQ in Virginia this past weekend with Mono Red per usual. This, combined with a couple of top 8s in the MTGO Challenge, were enough to return Red to glory once more. Now, there are many people who are curious why one would play Mono Red when Boros Convoke is available, and I'll be honest, it took me a moment, but it was actually quite a clever move in retrospect. Because Boros Convoke is going to implement a swarm strategy, whereas Mono Red is just playing for speed and best pound for pound, cost for power ratio on its cards. Where Knockout Blow is a mere blip on Convoke's radar, Sunset Revelry can pretty much be overrun by Mono Red, which is to say that hate cards only tertiarily translate between the archetypes. Thus, if all eyes are on Convoke, Red is in a weirdly good position to rise once more, and we saw evidence of that this past weekend. It also solidifies a diverse threat base in Standard right now that's wreaking havoc on all those archetypes trying to contain them. Regardless, I think this archetype will shift between Tier 1 and Tier 2 on a weekly basis, depending on how much hate is being packed for it, so stay vigilant, my friends.
Oh yeah. Talk to us more about this new card, Fugitive Codebreaker. How does the card feel overall to pilot with, and how often are you utilizing the disguise mechanic with it?
So the thing to understand about Codebreaker is it's basically just additional copies of Monastery Swiftspear with an occasional upside. There are going to be very few games where you're going to, flip it down and flip it up. Most games, it's just Swifty on 2, and it's, a little underpowered in that scenario. but there are going to be games that go a little bit longer, and in that scenario, it can turn into Ancestral Recall for 4 mana on red, along with a threat, and that's too powerful to ignore. And to be fair, we've got a lot of 2-drop options, but none of them are overwhelmingly powerful. Not enough to like just say, hey, let's eschew this entirely. You know what I mean? There's no clear home runs at 2 mana, so you kind of like, do you want Scoundrel? Do you want Felden? Do you want Blood-Tithe Adversary? You want the adversaries because those scale, but for the same reason, Fugitive can scale. And that's why I think it's starting to get played, so that you have more scalable threats that have decent mid to late game power.
Mono Red certainly has a wealth of options right now with this new set. Yeah, wow. All right, talk to us about Dimir Aggro.
So Hear Me Roar proved their namesake while toppling a 70-player MTGO challenge this past Saturday with Dimir Aggro. Now, this iteration marks the first build to truly embrace the new set, featuring 3 copies of Cryptic Coat and 2 copies of Lazav, Wearer of Facers. Now, Lazav is Dimir's version of Dennick with more fragility, but a much higher upside, and Cryptic Coat just feels right in a world with Gix, where being unblockable pays extra dividends. And let's not forget, it's an absolute nightmare for all the control lists running around. Let's also note that Ledger Shredder is making an appearance here for the first time in a good long while, almost certainly as a hedge against the Boros Convoke list that are double spelling during their turn with regularity. And let's note that this is also the same tactic that Izzet Phoenix employed to great effect in Pioneer and Explorer against Boros Convoke there. I personally had that done to me in the RCQ a ton, and it sucked. So, lastly, let's check those 3 copies of Glistening Deluge in the sideboard, providing a much-needed boost against both Convoke and Toxic lists. I mean, this is just a rock-solid version that already accounts for much of where the meta has gone in the past 2 weeks, and it's my favorite one out of this whole state of the meta.
Let's talk about wealth of options. Glistening Deluge, Path of Peril, Nightclubber now. Those make up the suite of baby wipes in black. Now, which of these do you believe is actually best for the meta of the moment, and which are worth a second look in case of a meta shift?
So I think right now, with Boros Convoke being able to push its creatures into 3 toughness off of War Leader's Call, I really like Path of Peril and Glistening Deluge, and the question of which one you run is completely dependent upon what colors you're in. So like if you're in Dimir, Glistening Deluge is fantastic because it's at worst going to give your creatures -1/-1 while it's going to hit all of theirs, whereas Path of Peril is going to hit all your 2-drops no matter what, right? You can't pump your way through a Path of Peril, but you can pump your way out of a Glistening Deluge. So in that scenario, it makes a lot more sense. But Glistening Deluge is going to be arguably worse in other scenarios where you have Glissa. You've got, you know, like Slogurk. Cards that are going to get hit by it as well, whereas those dodge Path of Peril. So it's really just where's your threat base. Nightclubber was better when we had mostly Toxic to worry about and we didn't have Convoke, because that -1/-1 was lethal against Toxic, but against Convoke, I mean, if you're lucky, you're getting Gleeful Demolition and some Volderon Epicures, and that's only if they haven't already boosted those with War Leader's Call. And if you watched any of the coverage of me playing, what you'd see is that hesitation for the mirror match where I'm like, do I put End the Festivities in? Because it's only 1 damage, and once it's dead, it's dead. But like it also deals with the broken starts on turn 1. Yeah, in the end, it wasn't the right call, but it was an interesting debate. So that's how you decide between those 3, frankly.
Thanks for that breakdown. It's certainly a question that I tangle with across multiple decks, which is the most effective card to use. But talk to us about Esper Midrange.
So, Sakai Tatsuya took down an 84-player Champions Cup in Tokyo, Japan with Esper Midrange over the weekend, reminding everyone that Rafine is still a dominant force in Standard, even if the new set didn't contribute much to it. Now, a side note, congratulations are also in order for Mattia Oneto, who smashed through a 20-player qualifier in Milan with the usual bats and boats formula. Now, this archetype has taken a hit with the new set releasing and the rise of Boros Convoke, which in turn led to the rise of Control. It's hard to be mid-range when you're getting squished between Hyper Aggro and Wrath-heavy Control, but if anyone can do it, it'll be Esper on the back of Rafine and Gix. Now, the most notable shift in this deck is the 4 copies of Doorkeeper Thrall to the main board, and while I'm sure this seems somewhat confusing as it's taking the place of Deep Cavern Bat in the main, bear with me. Doorkeeper Thrall absolutely hoses Boros Convoke while still being a fine choice in a deck with Gix and Rafine to activate card draw and pump it up. And now this particular build is actually closer to Esper Legends of old by using those 4 copies of Skrelv and Thalia, but it's found a balance between the two that I really love. And for those who haven't seen it yet, like Doorkeeper Thrall is the real deal. You thought Tidebinder was good, Doorkeeper Thrall shuts off their Tidebinders. It shuts off their Knight Errants, It shuts off all the triggers of everything. It's insanely good.
It really is. I was surprised to see this card not get that much play on week 1, but I guess people have now found it. question: do we need 4 copies of Thalia? Is there anything else that could use a couple of those slots, perhaps? What would you advise here? All 4 Thalia or anything less?
For this particular build, I like the Thalias because what this deck is trying to do is play a game very similar to Esper Legends, where you can get, turn 1 Skrelv, turn 2 Thalia, turn 3 Rafine. You still get the broken draws, but it's not acknowledging that you have to get the broken draws, which was always the problem with Esper Legends. It relied on you hitting that curve in a 3-color deck that wasn't always going to be able to do it. Whereas this one says, we want to hit that curve, we're going to give ourselves the best chance to hit that curve, but we're still going to play a little bit of interaction, and we're going to play some non-legendary creatures that just are well positioned. And that's really the biggest difference here.
Okay. That makes a ton of sense, actually. All right, talk to us about 4-color Slogurk.
This comes out of my hometown. Daniel Seidel pushed through a Convoke-heavy top 8 with 4-color Slogurk Legends over here in Iowa this past Saturday at a 22-player RCQ. Shout out, much love, Daniel. I know people will wonder why we give credence to smaller RCQs versus larger digital tournaments, but here's the thing, folks. RCQs bring out the old paper grinders, many of whom have multiple Pro Tours under their belts, and this top 8 was no exception, featuring stiff competition in the form of multiple old Pro Tour competitors. Quick shout out to Grunch for the top 8 with Boros Convoke at that RCQ, and subsequent discussion that led to me piloting a variant of their list the very next day to take down that pizza box open. Now, regardless, in this rebellion, we recognize merit-based achievement, and this deck is a true work of art. There's, honest to God, too many interactions to cover, so I will just say, fire it up on Arena, take it for a spin across a few different matchups to see how many triggers and lines of play there are to keep track of, and congratulations to Daniel, a well-deserved trophy and qualification indeed. I love this list. I don't want to play it in paper, there's so many interactions, but on Arena, this is a lot of fun.
Yeah, I can see why that is. Now, I did notice a full set of Glistening Deluge in the sideboard. There appears to be tension with the green creatures in the deck like Glissa, Slogurk. Is Deluge still the best option here, or are we citing out some of those creatures for it?
So it is still the best option. Slogurk can get pumped over it with just any land, and you've got Intis and Ronas that don't conflict with Deluge that would conflict with Path of Peril. So the only real issue that conflicts with it in a way that can't be shifted easily is Glissa. But you're just going to have to sequence your plays correctly. And if you're playing Glistening Deluge, the odds of you playing it on 3 and then Glissa on 4 is usually the right sequencing. And if you're playing Glissa first, there's usually a very good reason for it. So while there's a tension point, it's a pretty minor one. And again, this is a deck that plays Inti and Rona. You are going to be going through a shitload of cards. You're going to go through so many cards in your deck while you're playing. So you're going to have lines where you have Glissa and Deluge in hand, and you're like, all right, whatever, discard the Glissa, move on, hit the Deluge, and now we'll just get to Slogurk faster, because it doesn't need Glissa to live. It wants Slogurk more than anything else.
Yeah, as always, be careful in your piloting decisions. Make sure you sequence correctly. But talk to us about the last deck in Tier 1, 5-color Domain.
Kuroda Masashiro, again, sorry if I mispronounce, wrecked a 46-player Champions Cup in Sanomiya, Japan last week with the ever-popular Domain, proving that the Queen is still very much intact and invading qualifiers near you. Now, this list pushed heavy on early interaction with the 3 copies of Volcanic Spite in the main board, and while you may be wondering what's the point of positioning things that way instead of temporary lockdown, the likely answer is that Volcanic gives you that inadvertent card cycling that plays a large role in fixing those awkward draws that occur, in Domain in particular, while stutter stepping your opponent and not removing Beanstalk from play as you move up the curve. Now, there isn't really that much more to say about Domain. The flex slots change week after week. This week it's Volcanic Spite. Next week it might be Vanquish the Horde, or Tishana's Tidebinder, or any of a plethora of options. We've seen it be Go for the Throat. But the main board, it's locked, it's loaded, and a lot of the sideboard is as well. It just comes down to executing the battle plan correctly and knowing your lines, and that's Domain in a nutshell now.
Yeah, I can see how Volcanic Spite is just a hint better than what was previously in their Go for the Throat. Now, that does also mean a noted shift away from lockdown in the main instead to Spite. What does this mean? Does this mean that Domain needs hand fixing in those situations, or does it actually mean it can afford to shift over to single target removal in the first 4 turns?
I think it means that the format has sped up enough that Volcanic Spite is as good, if not better, than Go for the Throat a majority of the time. And that, I mean, that just means we're not slogging it out so much with the mid-range decks. We are trying to kill early drops while optimizing our hand. And that's what Volcanic Spite does better than Go for the Throat. You know, Go for the Throat kills the early drop, cool, so does Volcanic Spite. Volcanic Spite shuffles away that awkward card you don't want to see multiple copies of and gets you one step closer to more ley lines, to proper mana bases, to hitting those ramp cards you need to see in a timely manner to ensure you move the game state forward. It's kind of a question mark for me still. I haven't played much with that version of Domain, so I would need to see it in action to fully verify why it's there. But, I mean, you don't take down hardcore tournaments without having a good idea of what you're doing.
Oh, yeah, exactly. And that does it for Tier 1. Let's drop down into Tier 2, where I'll kick things off with Azorius Control. So King Harry made it to the finals of the 70-player MTGO Challenge last Saturday with their take on Azorius Control. Let's note the inclusion of 2 Meticulous Archive in the main board, smoothing out the mana base and embracing Surveil at long last. I also love that Deduce has become a mainstay in this, even if it's only a single copy in the sideboard, pushing Ezram and Sea Shark as the Deadly Duo to implement a catch-22 for many an archetype that seek to board out all their removal against control. I would like to see more Sunken Citadel in the mana base, but if you look over at the Champions Cup tourney in Japan, you'll see exactly why I say that and what I mean. Regardless, this list is solidifying around wraths, counters, and walkers in the classic style that is sure to piss off any number of opponents into actually roping you.
Absolutely, and we've all seen that happen. But Max, I look at this, and you know, this took a couple different second places. It was this close to being called Tier 1 this week. Can Control compete in a meta with such a diverse threat base?
I genuinely believe it can. This specific iteration holds cards that show their versatility in managing such a variety of threats. So March hits a majority of threats, artifact, creature, enchantment. No More Lies deals with any spell. It targets any spell, so creature or non-creature. And also deals with the fact that there's a lot of recursive creatures out there right now by exiling instead of just countering it. So just, little bits that kind of allow it to go over and above some of the creature-heavy meta that we're seeing right now.
That's a fair point. Now let's move on and talk a little bit about Golgari Midrange.
Than made the top 8 of the 70-player MTGO Challenge this past Saturday, capping off a string of top 8 performances by this archetype, which continues to keep it in Tier 2 land despite the lack of trophies. Note the stack 3-drop slot with Preachers, Sentinels, and Glissas. Note also the full set of Archfiends of the Dross as this deck attempts to go full aggro in the mid-game. Note also the single Frillback and Terra Sunder in the main with 2 more of each in the sideboard, betting on plenty of artifacts and enchantments to deal with, but also notably setting up for some graveyard hate with Frillback, as many new decks have actually tried to push into Reanimator territory. 2 Gix's commands as well also provide one-sided wipes against the many aggro decks.
Fair, and I look at this, I love the Archfiends in this right now, because we see those 4 Path of Peril sitting in the sideboard, and we know that Archfiend in the path is going to be like a Massacre Worm against Boros Convoke. You're going to hit him for 12 damage that turn alone. But that said, does this archetype need a dramatic change to handle the influx of control in the metagame currently? Is there an issue there?
I hate to say it because I love Golgari, but sadly, I don't feel like it is. But honestly, I can make that assessment and still be at a loss for which direction to go in to try to remedy that, if I'm being honest. Does the deck need more creatures with really valuable ETB effects? Does it need more hand hate? Does it need more ready-made 2-for-1 situations like with Graveyard Trespasser or the case of the Sash Skeleton? I don't know. I know that cards like Aklazotz and Oher Kaslem, the 2 gods, I've used those in the past in the archetype. They come back after being removed, but Control right now is known to use white and known to use exile-based removal. So it's definitely a tough matchup right now to be sure, and I think brewers are seeking solutions. And it may be why we haven't seen as much Golgari play recently.
That's fair. If you think you have the solution to Golgari, comment below. Let us know. Toss some suggestions. We'd love to see this archetype, explode in popularity and playability. And we haven't found the right build yet. I don't think anyone has. But if you think you've got it, let us know. Drop a comment. But with that, we're going to move things along and talk a little bit about Rakdos Midrange.
Takahashi Taro made it to the semifinals of the 84-player Champions Cup in Tokyo. this past weekend on the back of Rakdos Midrange, which is astounding to me because that looked like a very challenging event based on what the decks I saw in there. Hitsegu consumes all is a strong method to contain Boros Convoke in the sideboard. The same tech that Rakdos Midrange has been using in Pioneer, actually, to contain that version of Convoke as well. Yet another example of Pioneer tech being adapted into Standard, highlighting the longer rotation leading to some similarities in archetypes and thus the same hate for them as well. I do see that one copy of Illicit Masquerade in the sideboard. Is that a portent of things to come? To extract the truths in the sideboard are this color pair's way of dealing with troublesome enchantments as well. Also allowing you to, if they don't have an enchantment, it's hand hate. So who doesn't love hand hate? And so this archetype, pretty easy to understand what it wants to do, and it has tools in the sideboard to help it get there.
Fair. Now, when I look at this archetype, I mean, this has really become the Reanimator. Like, it's Rakdos Midrange, but it's really the Reanimator deck of choice because you get to go Cruelty into Carnosaur into potentially Cruelty. Like, you just get to, like, hit that combo Discover back and forth. What holds this deck back, though? Why is it not taking trophies? Because I've seen it do a lot, but I've not seen it get a trophy.
Yeah, a combination of control coming back to tackle the hyper aggro, and this deck is unfortunately getting sandwiched in that situation. And also Esper Midrange and super efficiency of a deck like Esper Midrange, the heavy card advantage that it provides. This deck has Deep Cavern Bats, and Deep Cavern Bats do present an early game hurdle for control, but it typically finds solutions around the Deep Cavern Bat beyond that to creature-based problems. And those solutions make the bat irrelevant. So I don't know that it has enough tools to tackle control and Esper at the same time. Those tend to present some real problems for the deck.
Well, let's take a look at a deck that should be absolutely ranching control on average. Bant Toxic.
Good old Bant Toxic. Pyotr Revizant, sorry if I butchered that name, had the sole perfect record in the Swiss of Sunday's 113-player Pizza Box Open with their take on Bant Toxic. They ran in their first loss against an Esper control deck, piloted by finalist Riley Bennett in the quarterfinals. Now, given that they were Darkstream's sole loss of the day, he can vouch for how strong the build is. This iteration in particular felt extremely balanced with the capacity to shift gears as it controls the game state through low curve, yet strong interaction. Plus, there's always games where you just, you hit double Rot Priest and march by turn 4 and it's over. In Standard, Bant Toxic and Boros Convoke make up the duo that are likely the most explosive decks right now, each featuring draws where you feel like you're playing in a different format than your opponent. As to which deck is better, though, it's hard to say. But going into Week 3, it looks like Bant Toxic is going to have to play catch-up.
And I look at a deck like this, and it doesn't have Bloated Contaminator in this build, it doesn't have Slaughter Singer, and instead it's got 3 copies of Bring the Ending and 3 Experimental Auguries instead. Do you think there's a particular reason we're moving back to that more controlled build and less creature-dominant build?
Yeah, I think I suggested last time that Bant Toxic moved in that direction to tackle a lot of the mid-range walls that it's running into to get bigger and go around, but right, we're going in the opposite direction. I think the reasons are both control decks coming back to address hyper aggro and hyper aggro itself. You need to be able to counter control's board wipes once you get set up. Bring the Ending gives the deck some longevity. Experimental Augury is a way to get through the clogged up battlefield of hyper aggro decks as well, and present more poison counters without having to actually swing through a thick army.
It's a fair point. Okay. Well, with that, let's get to the best segment every show. I love it so much. Get to show off all sorts of weird stuff. It's the Brewer's Corner, and we're going to kick things off with a little Dimir conspiracy theory. Now, credit to Ali Eldrazi. That's how we got this list. We just straight sniped it off the stream and decided, all right, let's take a look and see what it's about. So what this deck is trying to do, it's a combo deck. And what you're really trying to do is discard a Conspiracy Unraveler and then reenact the crime to shove it onto the battlefield for 4 mana. And you have these Beseeches to go find any part of the combo you don't already have. You can also have scenarios where you flip a Breach the Multiverse out of your hand and then reenact that instead, or an Atraxa. But the point is you're trying to use Reenact the Crime to just combo off, and you're like, okay, you combo, but how do you win? That's what the Jaces are for. Because as you keep comboing through the deck, eventually you're going to hit your Jaces, you're going to play your Jaces for free, and then you're going to mill them out. And you're going to get to play cards like Reenact the Crime to get the Jace back and mill them again, and then again. So this deck, once it starts going, it actually pops off really hard. The problem is it's about as glass cannon as you get. You have to have Reenact the Crime. It has to resolve, and you have to have creatures that can draw discard. So it's very, very glass cannon, but such a cool concept, one I had not even thought of, to be honest with you. So I'm thrilled to see that it's even possible. We haven't seen a cool combo deck in a minute, so I love that there's one.
Right. Yeah, I get excited about combo decks, and I see Beseech the Mirror in there as well to try to help make that happen. You got to have your combo enablers, and that'll help you find your cards. So yeah, okay, I see what's going on here. It makes me want to try it out, honestly. Combo decks haven't been a thing in quite some time, but let's talk about the next deck I have for you guys. Talked about Illicit Masquerade earlier. Rakdos Illicit Reanimator. All right, so really, the key to this deck, we talked last week about Illicit Masquerade and how now this deck really presents a great shell for that card because it follows a couple of key principles in Logic. Number one, having enough low curve creatures that you will have a hefty number of targets for Illicit Masquerade by the time the card lands. And number two, enough great ways to get your big boys and girls into the graveyard in the first place. So we've got Bitter Triumph, which is removal that you can discard to use. Inti helps you discard. Harvester's Blood tokens help you discard. And then, of course, we also have Carnosaur, which discards itself upon doing 3 damage. The sideboard, I would say, needs a little bit of tuning, but it does already have some key pieces against much of the meta already with Liliana, Trespasser, which I keep preaching needs to come back, Extract the Truth, Duress, and even Brotherhood's End. I think for this list, I'd honestly want to see Nightclubber in the sideboard as well, because it also presents another creature that you can tag with the Illicit Masquerade, but I kind of like where this deck is situated.
And credit to that one goes to Vroom Productions. Thank you for sending that our way. We love it. It's a neat list. Honestly, I really want to have the scenario where I get to have Illicit Masquerade with a token on Blood Tithe and then sack it to kill their creature to bring back Carnosaur to go nuts. You can get kind of nuts with that. So I'm into it. But we're going to move on to Mono Black Control. And this deck list is brought to you courtesy of Vixen Xavier of the MTG Rebellion Discord.
AKA that mono black guy.
That mono black guy, yes. This list is cool. I was talking to them a little bit earlier, and Deadly Cover-Up, from what they told me, was just amazing against Domain because you have the ability to collect evidence and remove all the herd migrations. So 1 Wrath is all of the Wraths you need against herd migration, which is... that used to be a big problem, you'd have to match them Wrath for Wrath or Wrath for migration. You have, and that was a problem. But now you're just all right, you're done with Atraxas, and now you're done with migrations. What do you have left? You know what I mean? You can actually run them out of decent, competent threats and get them down to Archangels versus Go for the Throats. Okay, we can win that battle 10 times out of 10. So I really like what they did here in composing this list. There's a lot of different pieces that I kind of want to toy around with and see if they're actually useful, but this is a cool list. I think with some tuning, it could actually get up there in the tier list.
Yeah, I like it because it also invests in Planeswalkers, which not a lot of people are doing right now. And there's a ton of value still to be had in the Planeswalkers that were in the deck with Sorin, Vraska, and Ashiok.
Oh, yeah.
But I have a deck for us that I created after watching a lot of Boros Convoke, Boros Humans, Boros Aggro last month. I came up with Pia Convoke. So I just want to say, why Pia? Well, Pia creates a ton of Thopters, and those Thopters are artifacts, and those artifacts, can be targeted by Gleeful Demolition. You can also use your Pakal Gnomes, in addition to that, to target for Gleeful and really go wide. Another card that I like in here is Dousing Device. It makes your Thopters hasty and spiky. It gives them that +1/+0, and it gives them haste right away so that they can do damage right when they get created. It also takes full advantage of the Battle Cry on Sanguine Evangelist. I think that card fits really well here with the ability to go wide with the Thopters. And then, of course, War Leader's Call, basically introducing another win con to the deck because you're producing those Thopters at a pretty high rate, and it's doing a lot of damage once you get going with that card. Knight Errant isn't as quick here unless you actually get to Gleeful Clue on turn 2. It's not as quick as it is in Convoke, but nonetheless, in the mid-game, it'll help you find important pieces like Pia Noir.
Fair. And it's a spicy list. I'm kind of curious to see if it's better than Boros Convoke. Yeah, time will tell. That's a rough one to get through, but you never know. And I'd like to see the innovation, man. I like to see the innovation. That said, we're going to move it along. and talk a little bit about Squirming Emergence Reanimator. Now, credit here goes to Hitachi Kyle. This was a cool list. It got the top 8 of one of the more recent Champions events in Japan, and it's all based on Rock and Squirming Emergence Reanimation and just getting to the point where you get to start dumping Atraxas into play very, very quickly. And to that end, you have a lot of ways to do that. You have these Founding of the Third Paths to help you ensure that you're going to hit the cards you need to hit. And this lets you copy these Squirming Emergences. That's the key there. Like, you get to do this, you get to mill some cards, and then you get to cast this out of your graveyard to then grab Atraxa. So it's got redundancy in what it's trying to do. You've got Picklock Pranksters to help you, again, find things like Wail of the Forgotten, help you find different pieces to enable your combo, because you're just filling up the graveyard, Squirming Emergence, dumping Atraxa into play, eventually milling them out with Jace, and you've even got this little Leer here to just go nuts once you hit that mid-game to late game. So I need a lot more play with this to fully understand all the angles, but it looks spicy. It looks really spicy, and clearly it's good. It top 8 at a major event.
Yeah, this is the reason I say bring back Trespasser. This deck, if enough people find out about it, we're going to have a problem. It's tough. It's a tough one to go up against. But I have for us a Gruul Aggro. Credit to Sleeveless MTG, friend of the channel, the Rebellion, member of the Discord. Love the dude. So this makes use of some new cards that I didn't think to put in Picnic Ruiner decks. Of course, this is a Picnic Ruiner deck, so you've got your staples, you've got your Questing Druid, you've got your Enablers, your Rages. We have Frantic Scapegoat, which is a new card. This one comes in Suspicious. It's so funny. The flavor on that is hilarious, by the way. The Suspicious Goat comes in suspiciously and makes another creature subsequently also suspicious. So you can give Menace to something else. Future Codebreaker also. Yeah, I love the artwork, by the way. The artist is apparently known for doing artwork like that all over. So there's some other pieces that look like that. But Codebreaker, another prowess haste creature at 2, but also has that disguise ability that we talked about earlier. Thran Portal is seeing play in both Boros and Gruul color sets, really because you want to have access to both colors on turn 1, as has been said. And then the new card Felonious Rage, another power boost option other than Monstrous Rage. So even more weapons for this deck. It really didn't need more weapons, but it definitely got them.
Fair. And that's going to bring us to our final segment, predictions for the upcoming week. Now, Max, we've looked at 16 archetypes tonight. What are your predictions going into week 3 of Karlov Manor Standard?
I predict the swing back from Convoke and Toxic wreaking havoc. Throw red in there as well. Will basically cause mid-range to rise as Control and other decks slot in against low-end creatures en masse. Expect Reanimator to come back, a more grindy version of Esper with new pieces. Even the return of Golgari. Brewers still have plenty of room to expand into new concepts with this set and explore better sideboard options against specific decks that are causing problems. We discussed, the differences between Nightclubber, Path of Peril, and Glistening Deluge, for example, and how those fit in differently to the meta. These are the sorts of decisions players are going to have to make. So really assess your local meta appropriately. It's different from place to place. But how about you, Darth? What do you see happening before next week?
I mean, I've heard all the sky is falling takes that we hear each week about the standard meta. I know people think Boros Convoke is cracked. It isn't. It's a strong tier 1 deck, but it is very possible to contain in this format. I barely escaped multiple control decks on my way to that trophy this past weekend, and literally just a few different top decks, and I was not getting there. So standard is in an oddly great place right now, in my opinion. You can play hyper aggro, you can play mid-range, there's control, there's ramp, all of that to your heart's content with odd combos pushing through on the side. Sequencing right now is rewarded heavily, as is having a strong game plan and practicing. So as to where I'm going to be for this next week, I'm going to go with Dimir Aggro with Lazav and Cryptic Code. I'm going to take that one out for a test drive before sinking myself into a specific list to tune up for the next big event. So if you're subscribed to Coffee and Grinders, get ready for a bunch of sideboard notes.
Nice. All right, y'all. Be sure to subscribe, turn on all notifications for our premieres when they go live Wednesdays at noon. You can also join below to support the Rebellion for just $3 a month. Gain access to our sideboard guides. And for those who want to rep the Rebellion at home, We actually have brand new merch store up on this YouTube channel featuring hats, hoodies, and more. If you're looking for something in the store that isn't there, just let us know down there in the comments what else you'd like to see, and we'll try to get it done.
Gang, it's going to be a few weeks before we return and do another episode of State of the Meta due to some scheduling conflicts, but we will see you for a Week 4 recap in the first full week of March. So until next time, Rebels, untap, upkeep, resist.
Resist.